right, well, welcome in everybody, and thank you for joining us. And our session today is Beware of Bad Actors, Leveraging AI-Powered Threat Intel to Keep Industrial Systems Safe and Available. So very topical today to talk about AI, talking about the bad actors or threats to our manufacturing, safety, production, reliability as well. But again, thanks for having us in. Just a couple little housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. And then also for the audience, please use the Q&A widget onto the right over there. And we will be able to see those questions. Hopefully we can address them maybe during the presentation, the webinar. And if not, then we'll try to leave some time at the end to address those. And if not, then we'll follow up afterwards. So again, please use the Q&A widget on the right-hand side there. So with this broad and timely topic, fortunately, I'm emceeing. I'm surrounded by super smart people that we're going to get into the deeper aspects of this agenda. And so I'm joined here with Victor and Larry and Rob, and we're going to go through an agenda that's going to talk about AI. We are going to talk about the bad actors and some of that impact. That we're going to talk a little bit about the generative AI piece of it, which is very topical right now. And we're going to get into people and processes and technology in regards, again, to threat and AI and how we use that, and then some tips and tricks at the last, and wrap that up with some Q&A. So with that, I would like to turn to my esteemed panel, and I'll go left to right as I view it. And so, Victor, I'm going to have you lead off and just give a little bit of an introduction to yourself, and then you can hand off to Larry, and then Rob, you can wrap us up, and we'll get going. So, Victor, if you want to kick us off.
Hey, thank you very much, Richard, for having me. I really look forward to opportunities like this to learn something from the rest of you as well. So my name is Victor Atkins. I work for 1898 & Co., which is a part of Burns & McDonnell. My role here is to advise executives and leaders across critical infrastructure sectors on industrial cybersecurity. Prior to that, I did about 17 years in the U.S. government, mostly in national security and intelligence roles. Most recently, 7 years at the head of the cyber intelligence mission at the Department of Energy, where my team monitored and assessed and briefed out nation-state threats to the power grid that could lead to disruptions, so mainly in operational technology environments. I also oversaw a lot of research at the national laboratories that was basically replicating and analyzing those threats. So I got a great appreciation of these things we're talking about today. They're not fantasies, they are real. And our adversaries are capable of causing disruptions at a time of their choosing. So once again, I look forward to sharing what I know and learning from all of you today. So thank you.
All right.
Hello, Larry Alls here. I've been in the OT space for about 25 years. Currently, I'm an OT solution director for HCL. I've worked with basically some automation vendors, GE, ABB in my past. So I've done a lot of OT cybersecurity work, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you today.
Very good. All right, Rob.
Thanks, Larry. Rob Putman, work in our ABB process automation business area. My role is global manager of cybersecurity products and services. Been in the OT space for a little over 10 years now, 22 years in the cybersecurity space, although I didn't know it at the time. I think my first cybersecurity job was working for Sony PlayStation and taking the PS2 network adapter to market. And our charter mandate was figure out how to break it. And we did. We had a lot of fun.
Right on. Well, good. Well, I'll wrap up by reintroducing myself. So Rich Springer, I'm the Director of Product Marketing for OT Solutions for Fortinet. So I've been in the OT space largely from an operator asset owner piece for 25 years, and then cybersecurity for the last 5. But again, I will be maybe throwing in some little nuggets here and there, but look at the panel and for their esteemed answers. But so with that, let's get going. So level setting on AI. It's a broad term. We can go back to maybe the Terminator movies or something, but it's always young in our lives. Maybe it was a future kind of conversation. AI has been around, and we'll talk about that. And then, of course, with the generative AI piece that has just come to form and has attracted a lot of attention from non-technical folks. So with that, let's start off with Larry. Maybe you can talk about AI and machine learning or ML and how that's driving digital transformation in manufacturing, and just kind of give us maybe a brief history of how long that's been in play and how it's being leveraged.
Sure. Well, AI, artificial intelligence, and ML, machine learning, obviously, they've been around for a long time. In fact, AI and ML, they've been used as interchangeable terms since back in the 1950s. Wasn't used for much back then other than playing checkers, but the evolution, it had begun at that point. So it sat kind of stagnant until the late 90s, early 2000s, when it was revived with the development of voice and face recognition. Since then, most public, they had not have any type of interaction with AI or ML, so they really don't know of anything until ChatGPT came around in 2022. And so that started the generative AI craze, right? Is this going to take over our life? It can talk for me, it can think for me, and it's not like that at all. And we'll get into that later, but it's not new to the industrial sector. Especially like manufacturing. It's, as far as digital transformation is concerned, it's not new. It's been around, and what it does is it receives data, for example, from temperature or tolerance information from sensors on a piece of manufacturing equipment. And this has been around for quite a while. And what it does is it collects that data, and then it uses that. And remember, that used to be all analog. Well, that's now digital. And so transforming all this digital information into usable data that takes that and it collects the data, and it basically uses that data to search for trends or patterns or anomalies, or for any type of information that may not be obvious to us mere humans. In case of manufacturing, machine learning algorithm would learn to send proactive alerts, especially when temperature exceeds a certain threshold. It allows operators to take action before there's an issue. It's done nothing but evolve exponentially since then.
Yeah, interesting. Rob, how about yourself? What's been your experience in the same vein as far as AI, ML being around, and then how it's influenced manufacturing, and then how has it accelerated digital transformation?
Sure. In general, I take a skeptical position out the gate until I see something useful or practical. I have seen some pretty cool application of digital twins, specifically focused on cybersecurity. But I will say that the model requires a lot of training. It requires domain expertise and focused targeting. Like, we're looking for very specific things in this environment, and when they see something with a strong degree of confidence, it's meaningful. On the Chat GPT side of things, I've played around with it, probably not enough, but tried to ask it some hard questions, tried to get it to build executive presentations for me, the usual kind of things you're going to do. And I haven't been that impressed, but maybe that's not the right position to take. I'll throw that out there. You guys, any feedback?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely early days, and actually it's a nice segue I'll turn to Victor on that. Victor, same kind of question scenario about AI ML, and then maybe your thoughts too about the generative piece.
Well, I wrote all of my points today using it, so.
I'm a virtual MC. I'm not real either. So. Yeah.
So again, I mentioned my work at the National Laboratories, and I did see at my time there some cutting edge research on the use of AI and machine learning. I mean, I think generative AI, the aim, of course, is to have it essentially use machines to replicate behaviors that we would otherwise, think of as humans doing, such as, cognitive functions like creativity, applying mastery to new problem sets or new things, and being able to react to that in an automated way, perhaps even predict outcomes based on information that's in front of it, and do that all at a speed that either exceeds or all people doing those functions, or all people that would potentially do those functions. So that's what I think the hope for generative AI is. My experience has been mainly what Larry described as machine learning, or regular AI, which is more like, I think of as a training step on that journey towards generative AI, where you're basically using baseline data from, let's say, your manufacturing system and just running that through an algorithmic model, training that model to react in a way that you think it should, and looking for accuracy. So that would not be predictive. That would not be something you would turn loose on an automation floor and just let it run. And that's kind of where things are today. And I think on the face of it, this whole conference is probably exploring this question about what it could do and what its potential is for manufacturing. I think that, the idea, and again, the hope is to try to avoid uncertainty and avoid errors that humans could cause too. That would be another great benefit that it could bring. But there's risks, and that's what we're here to talk about. I mean, like any digital process, generative AI could be hacked or hijacked. I don't think we can imagine, it'd be hard to imagine scenarios where that could be the case. We have nation state adversaries like China out there have been investing in AI for a long time. They've demonstrated their willingness and intent to use digital access and processes to achieve advantages of their, to disrupt processes for strategic objectives. So I don't think it's, going to be long before we see AI being used for malicious purposes. But even if we just take out the malicious actors altogether, as these models and algorithms undermining AI get more complicated and more advanced, especially, they become opaque to the people who manage them. Like it's too complicated for people to understand what's even going on if they get too complicated. And so if a system goes haywire, or even if it's not hijacked, it just starts malfunctioning, we have to address the possibility that the people on the floor or on site will have to manage and troubleshoot that. So how much do you really want to put in the hands of something like that when you have productivity and safety on the line? So this is really about trust. I think the future of AI in these environments is about trust, and how much do you want to trust them, and the cultures around the existing processes, the human cultures around those processes. They're not early adopters, right? And for good reasons. I mean, all the control system environments I've ever been in usually have apprentice-like systems where somebody is being trained and evaluated, and they have to build rapport with their peers, and people have to trust somebody, especially, like I said, when potentially safety issues are on the line for decisions that they make. And so generative AI will have to fit into that culture, just like people do. Yeah. And I think that we have to be mindful of that it's not just the technology that we're talking about here. If it's going to replace human functions, it's going to have to act within human tendencies.
Yeah. I fully agree with all of you. And then I'll just give like the security piece of it. I mean, we've had AI ML in the background processing these billions of data points a day in order to root out the bad actors, of which we're going to get to in just a second. But the other thing about AI ML is it was almost kind of like an in-house piece of it, right? It was a tool that you're using to help promote your industry or your product and what have you. And then the generative piece of it is now exposing or leveraging the outside information. So I think, Victor, to your point, which is like the quality aspect of it, and then also like the most nefarious of people could alter the information in order to skew, the language models or what have you. So that's a whole different realm. We're not, I think our data science, we can take off the data scientist cap and get back to the topic at hand here. And I do want to bring, yes, go ahead, Rob.
Just real quick question for Victor. So listening to you talk about adoption and integration into operational culture, the aging workforce, right? There's not a strong pipeline sitting behind these folks. So could that be a forcing function to adopt this kind of technology, with the caveat that a lot of the concerns you raised there they're going to be there, and there's going to be less people there to have some sort of oversight? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, you do want to have technology to replace functions that, because labor costs are high. Like there's a lot of business drivers. It isn't just the availability of the workforce. Labor adds cost. I mean, margins in some of these environments is very tight. So if you can increase your margins by leveraging this kind of technology, there's a strong incentive to do so. And like you said, you can shorten the amount of time for, training and replacing people with this kind of stuff. And so I don't know where the ideal place would be in terms of the function that you would use generative AI in terms of replacing people. But I think you would want to drive that down to the lowest level decision making that you can, wherever you happen to be. I think it would be very tough to really just turn it loose and not have anybody supervising its performance and quality and things like that. But yeah, I think it could potentially solve a lot of workforce challenges, particularly, where again, you either have to have long lead times for training, or it's just hard to find the people to do that kind of thing.
I think filling that gap with the people piece of it, just the bodies. I mean, hopefully the generative AI piece of it frees up the lower tier work in order to elevate the humans to do the higher tier work. So there's a shift there as well. Let's go on to the bad actor piece of this. So talking about AI, ML, and neural networks and generative AI and so forth, is that we're talking for the power of good. But we also know that the bad actors out there, whether they be individual or crime syndicates or nation state level activity, I mean, there is this threat, about AI and stuff. So there's a competing piece of it in here. The focus on the manufacturing part of it, and one thing I'm going to reference is the Fortinet 2023 Global Ransomware Report. And what's stuck out to me is our analysis on the manufacturing sector. So there certainly was a shift as far as verticals in the OT space to focus on manufacturing. And what we saw from that is that manufacturers were often paying for these ransoms, and their ransoms in response to some of these production interruptions and so forth are $1 million higher. Mm-hmm. So some interesting things going on in that space. And then now we're going to throw AI on top of it. Rob, maybe you can just kind of start us off with maybe your perspective on why manufacturers are kind of quick to pay in this situation, or even why those ransoms are higher.
Well, I'll step even further back than that. I think at least on the on the crime side, it can vary to the degree of organization. I've heard some speakers talk about a very mature, innovative economy or market out there, right? There's a lot of innovation. It's very creative, and they iterate quickly. So just thinking about new tools that make the work of creating other tools to do your bidding, which is extortion, that kind of thing, I would be very concerned, because the innovation, the capability of the tools used by threat actors could grow exponentially. And then we've got that age-old defender-attacker dilemma, right? We got to be right every time. They only need to be right once. Mm-hmm. So I could see that being a real challenge. I'll throw it over to the group. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Victor, I mean, do you, being at the crosshairs of AI for the good and for bad based on your background and so forth, but where can manufacturers use the power of good of AI to help in this one-on-one situation?
So, most of that research I was a part of at the labs is really about how to use AI in cybersecurity or some kind of security application. And in some ways, this is ideally suited for that, because threat detection, mitigation, identification of issues that could happen at the same speed as the threat would be, optimal. Right now, it's people identifying it, trying to make sense of it, responding, and then paying ransom is another decision that's altogether complicated for legal and financial reasons. I think the good of AI here, it could be developed to automatically detect, triage, process, or even sandbox. If we're just going to go outside of ransomware for a minute, we're just looking at like a disruptive, let's say a 0-day or a malware attack. You could envision AI being able to, process and sandbox that traffic into another place, and even return a controller, like a process controller, to a known good state automatically. Mm-hmm. So that could happen at a speed that doesn't even cause a noticeable disruption. I mean, you could imagine people standing on the process line and not even knowing that that's happening, because it's happening at the speed of a machine. In a ransomware scenario, if you're talking about that specifically, ransomware actors, they have a pretty narrow band of tactics, techniques, and procedures that they follow. And those things they have digital and virtual footprints. You can track those on the MITRE ATT&CK framework and things like that, right? So if you could train a model or an AI capability to identify those kind of techniques within the bounds of what we've already seen, and maybe even predict, advanced attacks that we haven't seen, you could imagine where you could put an AI capability either around critical process functions in the OT layers, down near the levels of process, or even at ITOT boundaries where there's remote connectivity coming into the system, so that they can identify those behaviors and alert and maybe even prevent them from happening. If you want to get all Star Trek on us here, and go really advanced, you might I don't know if it was Larry or Rob mentioned digital twins. You could imagine an AI capability actually redirecting an attack like that into a virtualized twin environment that looks, feels, tastes like an operational environment to the actor, so that threat could run itself and run its course. You can collect all the information about it, all the forensics about the actor and what they're doing, and then you could share that information with law enforcement or the government, and then they could respond with that in a way that I expect the actors would not welcome, right? So that actually is a way to really up the ante on what a ransomware actor would be willing to take if they were starting to feel the pain of that. And I also think that, the dark web and these other anonymized forums where ransomware as a service or other packages that they share information amongst each other about targets, it's a common thing for one ransomware actor to collect and maybe gain access to a company and then sell that access or sell that ransomware package to somebody else on a dark web platform. You could have an AI capability scouring that platform or those platforms for those kind of indicators, find early indicators that you've been compromised or that your company has information out there that's being shared about it, and then maybe prevent or harden yourself against that attack before it occurs. Right. So that's an area that is outside of your network, but I think it would be very helpful. But we have to keep in mind, and I think this is the big risk long term, is that this is always a cat and mouse game between operator and defender, or offensive and defense. So anything we do on the defense, we can imagine will be reacted to at some level and advanced on the offense, and there will be a back and forth. But I'm optimistic in the sense that I think that defense wins championships kind of thing. If we get a really robust AI protection around that attack surface, I think it'll be much harder for offensive cyber activities to occur if it's having to face this kind of front.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way you talked about that too. And I was thinking, again, the application of AI and the security piece of it. There's kind of like three stages, which is again the AI ML research going back and the data that's presented, and then the signatures that are put into the security process. And like that's almost an after the fact. And then you mentioned about network detection, piece of it, and that's actually looking at the existing traffic and seeing the anomalous behavior, which should pop up even more so in a production environment, right? I mean, we're more batch processed, we're that type of thing, whereas an enterprise has a whole lot more applications going on and data flows. But that's leveraging AI ML in order to see those anomalies, and then what can you do from a preventative standpoint again, and that's of course AI ML driven, but then the generative piece of it in order to make it easier for the security operators to actually enact a playbook or to do those actions or take them inherently. So AI is behind all that, and then it's just a matter again balancing that with the safety and production priorities. And so with that, Larry, I'm gonna turn it to you. Take AI and then look from an operations standpoint, again, from production, safety, the kind of the table stakes of the industrial environment. How do you see AI playing there?
Well, AI tools, the AI enhanced tools that are out there today allow for you to create use cases for things like anomaly detection. A lot of this is what Victor just talked about. You can spot potential insider threats, access anomalies, or you can find malicious patterns in network traffic. You can use predictive analysis to detect potential data downtime or machine downtime. You can use machine learning for threat hunting. So all these things are things that you would feed into it, parameters that you would feed into the tool, and it would help you analyze this data much quicker than we would ever be able to as humans. but it can predict potential safety or availability concerns. They can produce reports, actionable reports that the OT security team or your generation team can actually look at the report and determine, are there any safety or availability issues? You can meet the metrics and you can pass these reports up. So it gives you the ability to have reporting on any of these safety and availability issues. And generative AI has been added to a lot of these tools now to help us as humans be able to interface with these security tools. A lot of times it requires the report generators require special syntax or special code language that you have to enter into. That a lot of that's changed due to generative AI, and it allows us just to use real simple English to make requests and get this information out. So we're trying to make it simpler for the folks that don't know what cybersecurity is all about, and it also helps them get the data they need to make intelligent decisions.
Can I be the voice of dissent for a moment?
Yeah.
Just to get debate going? So yeah, I get it. It's attractive, all those kind of things. But the feeling I get is you got to focus on the basics still. Secure reference architecture, building a defensible environment, applying just the foundational security controls. And those may change as threat actors focus differently. Who knows, right? So I'm kind of seeing this as an additive to just good old-fashioned security. I guess that makes me the old guy in the room, right?
No.
Why isn't old-fashioned security good enough? But the other concern I think that's coming up for me is it could foster a sense of complacency, right? We've got the algorithm. We've got artificial intelligence managing this environment. And the first thing that comes up for me is what could go wrong? And you've got none of the other good practices in place. I know that's an absolute scenario, but that's my voice of dissent. Go for it, guys.
Well, I mean, I think like all technology you add to a system, if you believe that the technology itself is going to solve everything, you're probably in the wrong headspace.
There you go.
So, like you said, I think it's there to help. It's there to augment, maybe even replace certain human functions, but it shouldn't be there to just totally solve your problem and turn you loose.
It can't be, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's a good mentality for anybody to have, frankly.
Yeah,
and you can get so like the bean counters that run the organization may get so enamored with the cost savings that they go overboard and start eliminating people. And I think in a lot of the threats we've already seen, let's just go to the power industry for a minute. Not having people there to respond and recover from an incident caused even more problems than they were saving. So I think there is a tremendous balance between the people and the technology that you're introducing here.
Well, and so Richard, I mean, you're the moderator, obviously, but isn't this sort of a theme or an undercurrent around this? Like, what is the application of this stuff, right? And there's clearly a maturity scale going on right now. We're trying to discover how and where do we implement this. It obviously can't be super expensive, all those kind of things, and it can't supplant good practices and good processes.
Yeah. I mean, I fully agree, and this is a technological leap, right? And we've seen this over time, and it takes some vetting. It takes some. I think of resiliency, right? I mean, if we bring on this jump in technology, we're also bringing on a jump in risk, right? So we got to make sure that we have this new flavor of resiliency when we're becoming more and more AI driven, is that we've got resilient aspects of that. So there is, it will take time. And, again, as long as we're doing this for the power of good and having benefit and not exposing ourselves, then we'll get there. But it is just so timely right now. Again, there's just a lot of outside influence as well with the generative thing just being so popular. But on that note, let's talk about another driver here. And you talk about the bean counters and so forth. One thing I wanted to throw in.
It's a term of endearment. So
exactly right.
Nobody should get offended by that.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Love our bean counters. But talking about AI, talking about the new world, talking about the advantages, then we segued into the bad actors piece of it. And then we have some regulatory piece coming in here as well. So I wanted to just talk about the SEC reporting requirements for public companies. We've seen events in industries go on. They may or may not have reached the headlines. We're kind of left guessing as far as what actually happened here and what was the impact or how it happened. And now with the SEC reporting requirements coming in the back end of last year, and a material event needs to be divulged. And I've just been following what's going on with Clorox. This is just because Clorox is a topic, they're something I'm following, not to point them out, but they're now reporting out. We had an event. They're monetizing that event. They're giving some details around it. They're saying, hey, the costs associated with this material event are going out several quarters. And so it's a financial shareholder reporting, but from a cybersecurity standpoint, to me, the benefit here is on the education piece of it, to being exposed and to really, kind of educate the world as far as what's going on here. I'll say with, Victor, with your piece of it, from what you've seen from those transactions piece of it, and then maybe even the minutia of like cyber insurance and how this is affecting those things. So maybe you could kind of give your perspective on that again, from what's changed from a regulatory standpoint and what's at stake here.
Yeah, so I might leave it to the others on insurance. I'm not as much of an expert on that piece. Maybe they could add on that one. But I will, if we take a big step back here, right? Like, you're right. If outside of unregulated sectors, if there was a cyber event, there was no reason for anybody to report it. In fact, there's a lot of reasons to not report what happened and to keep that very quiet. So I find the SEC ruling to be fascinating because it's basically saying, your shareholders have a right to know, because this is kind of like across the board. Cyber has now become a way a system could be failed or disrupted. So it's a risk. It is not just an enabling function that is being leveraged to gain more monitoring, visibility, control, all the benefits that people talk about that raise revenue or reliability or whatever. It's now a risk. And I think that the SEC rule reflects that reality. So, and it's making people report it because of financial reasons. So it wasn't long ago in an OT environment, there was no technology around to even monitor activities in that environment.
Sure.
And there were a lot of good reasons. Maybe those were designed from the start to be air gapped and on-prem, and there was no remote access into those environments at all. So why did you have to worry about a cybersecurity risk there? I've heard this throughout my career. These OT systems are so finicky that if you blow on them too hard, they're going to collapse. So I can't possibly allow for another technology like a monitoring solution or an asset inventory device or anything like that to come into the environment. So keep it all out. That was kind of the way it was treated. But that's totally changed. I mean, now OT data, like all data, is seen as valuable. It's being mined by companies for to be able to do business analytics and predictions on operations. It's even going into the cloud, which for some people is absurd, but that's where it's going. The pandemic created all kinds of remote access into these environments because of workforce, needing to have access, but not allowing everybody to be there. So, good luck getting any of that pulled out of a system now that the workforce has become adapted to it and found the convenience of it, to be, helpful for them in their lives. Third-party vendors all over the place. I mean, ABB, I'm sure, is one of them as well. They're part of their contracts and part of the way they do business is requiring or expecting or hoping to have remote third-party access so that you can monitor or maintain those systems, more effectively or efficiently. So there's just a lot of, I think of it as like plunging into this OT environment from what is traditionally an IT layer of access and data transfer, bidirectional in many cases. And so this all, from my perspective, just expands this attack surface tremendously. That's what our adversaries are looking at. And that attack surface is now way beyond the boundary of the asset owner's organization and therefore their ability to control. And so insurance companies, the general public, the government, they all have strong interest in making sure that these risks are known and that these attacks don't happen on a regular basis. So companies are starting to feel that a little bit. And the U.S. government, I mean, there's not a week that goes by, it seems now, that they don't put out something about Volt Typhoon and the China threat to critical infrastructure. So it's no longer even plausibly deniable for anybody to think that these threats aren't realistic or probable. So they have to become part of their risk register and their risk accounting. And so no one can say I couldn't have foreseen this risk. So therefore, what are you going to do about it? And if, like, we talk about Clorox, I just did some research in the food and beverage industry. I think the average breach in that environment is like $4 million a breach, roughly. I mean, that's just what we know about. So these things are also costing a lot of money. And so how you justify not having invested in asset inventory, OT monitoring, industrial cybersecurity to your shareholders if you end up having a breach? And then you have to report out that you didn't have any of those things in place when all of these threats were foreseeable. So we, 1898 and Co., we've already seen a lot of our customers come to us with roadmaps and, asking us to help them put industrial cyber into their projections for the future and everything. But all of this, for budgetary reasons, lags like years in some cases to get stuff paid for, scoped, and installed. So we are kind of at this really critical juncture, I feel, where there's awareness of the issue, but there hasn't been a lot of implementation of strong security controls to either monitor, detect, and prevent these kind of activities. Yeah. So I'd love to hear these guys.
As well. I mean, you covered a lot of ground there, Victor, and Rob's Larry's chomping at the bit as well. So
Larry, go for it, and then I want to pounce on Larry, disclosure. So
Larry.
The one thing that I can speak to from experience over the last few years, I've done a lot of network segmentation work, and the one thing that I've found in the manufacturing space is most people haven't prioritized the risk of their assets. They don't know what's important, what's not important. They just, in some cases, they don't know what they have. So, but when we find out what they have and we say, hey, which one of these is your highest priority line? Typically the answer is all of them.
Yeah.
We don't want anything to go down, right? So from an insurance perspective, that's not an acceptable answer. So, there's an education piece here that we have to also take the industry through, that not everything can be priority one. And you have to, from risk acceptability, they have to be able to define, what is their highest risk acceptance on a specific machine. And most cases that doesn't exist today. Now, Rob, I know you're ready.
Yeah, I want to pounce on disclosure for a moment. Quick comment, though, on sort of the sketchiness of a PLC, that kind of thing. I've got an opposite anecdote. I was in Saudi Arabia a while back at a cement manufacturing facility, and one of the operators went out of his way and took great pride in pointing out a PLC that was 80% buried under the sand in a corner, and he said, it's been like that for 15 years.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure there's stuff, if you sneeze at it, it's going to tip over, but for the most part, it's pretty hardened and robust. So the disclosure piece, right? I mean, government is stepping in because there's a problem that isn't being addressed, right? That's usually its function, and that's what we're seeing. And I think all of us in the room know that attacks are under-disclosed, under-documented. Visibility, regardless of privilege, is very poor. I've experienced and seen with two different companies the desire from our customers to have some sort of secure back-channel communication, whether it be for just vulnerabilities that we know exist in their production environment, or assistance in, vetting out, are we exposed to something that's trending in the wild right now? So there's definitely a desire on the part of asset owners to have this more comprehensive visibility. But the thing that scares me is, as soon as you start making this information more and more public, you're basically giving bad guys who didn't think about that one the script. And So that concerns me. So there's got to be some degree of process, rigor, diligence around, not just to get the collection that's useful, but governance. Like, how is it shared? How is it used? And publicly, or even a degree or two below that, I would be against.
Yeah. I mean, as a former government official, he used to have to work with private sector entities around these incidents and what would they share and what would they wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, this is tough. I mean, this is a tough issue, but I think that it can't be used as an excuse not to share the information. That's unacceptable. So then what has to be kind of debated is what is the most useful piece of information. So shareholders deserve to know something about the risk that they're taking for investment. But like from a kind of the public and general awareness, I do think that sharing technical indicators with like the FBI, for instance, or a law enforcement agency, like confidentially, is a great practice. That's not going to get exposed. The government's going to do a lot of washing to make sure that that's anonymized. So I think there's mechanisms to do all of it. It's just we can't use the fact that there's no regulation or there's no reason to report it as an excuse not to do it.
Yeah.
I just, that's to me, just can't be tolerated anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's like I said, the buzzword for me, or the buzz term, is cyber is now a risk to the environment. It's got to be treated that way.
Yeah.
And not just ignored.
Yeah. And Victor, I can tell you from where I stand, two different things. I mean, one, we do a global survey of our state of OT cybersecurity. And in that, the CISO has become more empowered to take over OT. And that is a byproduct of the executive suite. Now it's elevated to that top 3 or 5 in that risk register. And so they're all looking around like, you CISO, you know, the COO is nodding his head, the CIO is nodding his head, the legal's nodding their head. Like, yeah, this is the big deal, folks. And then we got the SB coming. So definitely see that in that survey. And then also as I, talk to customers, it's morphed from that plant manager with a small budget, small team to now the CISO, looking with many more resources and also carrying that corporate risk. So that is definitely transitioned.
Yeah. Can I just add a point here real quick? We have leaders in our industry who I'm not going to name here, but you guys probably have heard these topics where they will say things like, well, we're hyping the threat because we don't see all these incidents. So where are all the incidents if the threat is so severe? Right.
That's the old absence of evidence argument, right?
That's a terrible, like, you can take an 8th grade logic course and know that that's a fallacy of logic. Right. So but it's underreported, which is why you don't see the incidents. Those same surveys will talk about, I think one I saw recently, over 80% of, maybe it was the Fortinet survey, like 80-something% of industrial sector companies that responded to the survey said they had an incident. So where's the gap? But there's a huge gap between that 87% or so, 80+% that are having incidents that are having material impact on their organization, and then that which is getting reported. And in many sectors, it's only getting reported because the severity was so high it couldn't be ignored. So I think that there has some of this just reporting on it and getting us a better idea of what the stakes are here helps inform regulation. It helps inform policy. It helps inform national security responses. I mean, I think it has a very positive. The benefits of that kind of thing outweigh the risks, in my opinion, if we did it in a more systematic way.
Yeah, and I think that over a shorter period of time, what CISA is doing, Homeland Security and the ISACs, and then this aggregation. I mean, we're kind of we're raising the common denominator of education, and therefore validation into getting some of these solutions in place too. So it's happening quickly, which is fortunate, right? But it really is a lot about awareness and education. So we're coming up on about 14 minutes here, and so I want to cover off on some last aspects of this, and we're going to simplify it down into the people, processes, technology, and I'm going to have each one of you kind of lead us off on this piece of it. So Victor, I'm going to turn to you first to talk about the people problem. Knowing that it's the most ubiquitous and the weakest part in all of this, but as we try to wrap our head around, again, the bad actors, the risk, the AI, and then the technologies, we have this simplistic cellular-based organism that seems to be the downfall of all things. So can you talk to us a little bit about the people problem?
Well, isn't generative AI going to recognize someday that people are the source of all our problems, and then we'll find a way to get rid of us?
I think tomorrow.
I think, yeah. So that problem may solve itself soon. But no, I don't know how I ended up on the people one here, but I'm actually not very bullish on this idea that you can train your people not to make mistakes. So like a lot of companies will put a lot of investment in training around like spear phishing identification and these other cyber hygiene things. And to me, you have to recognize something, that people in overtasked positions, and particularly on the business side, who are like asked to process information quickly, open emails, do blind sales lead calls and all these other things where there's a lot of uncertainty about the thing you're interacting with. That's the very behavior that the adversaries are taking advantage of to concoct these spear phishing things. So to hope that people will be just as vigilant and security minded as they are trying to be efficient and effective in the day-to-day job of the pace of business is just unreasonable, in my opinion, to ask people to do both things equally well. And it's the good adage in cyber that it only takes once for somebody to get in, right? One mistake and they can get in. So I just think that you should train your people on cyber hygiene. I'm not saying not to do that, but I believe that particularly in industrial settings, particularly around people that are doing engineering and control and operations and procurement and a lot of things that are not traditionally seen as cyber related, you have to start getting the cyber risk discussion into their daily lives, just like you do with safety today. People thought that's like kind of become cliche, but at Burns McDonnell, we do a safety moment before every meeting. Like we make sure people are talking about safety all the time, no matter what their job role is. I think there's a lot of people that do procurement, that do contracts, that do design on greenfield projects, just down the line, where the cyber risk and the cyber informed discussion about how this technology may be adding risk to their overall organization needs to be discussed, because everybody kind of has a position on this. Everybody can ask a question about the benefit of this new AI technology. They could ask, well, what's the risk that this introduces to us? And that can create a conversation, which could lead to then some mitigations and controls that aren't just cybersecurity related. They may be, business related or operational related, or you may introduce a new procedure that would mitigate that problem. So I think, to me, you solve the people problem by just trying to embed cyber risk into a lot of everyday procedural discussions and not just think of it as the CISO's domain for cybersecurity training and things like that.
Okay. Larry, Rob, anything to throw on the people side? Anything to add in there?
My only thing is, if AI fails, does it know?
Sounds like a business opportunity, Larry. Good. Robbie, did you want to say anything, or do you want to move on into the processes piece of it?
Just a quick comment. I fully agree. People are the weakest link, but also people are good at organizing together, communicating. It's likely never going to be a perfect problem to solve, but the more awareness, communication you create, you lower the probability. And I think that's the goal.
Yeah. So just one last point on that. I think Rob had brought this up earlier about protect, detect, and respond and recover. If we're talking about AI here, if AI does more of the heavy lifting on that workforce piece and takes the burden of the detect and protect functions, which could be far more advantageous for machines, then people can focus on respond and recover. And I think that's where a lot of that human factor is really advantageous.
Yeah. But until we realize Skynet, right, everyone's going to have a number, right? That's kind of a terrible question to ask, but sometimes if you know the person well enough, just ask them, what's your number? It of course assumes you have access to something that's worth that number, but I think everyone's got a number. Larry, Victor, you remember what that next
Where does the process change play? That was for you, Rob. Governance, audit, investigate, further remote access, etc.
Yeah. So, process discipline is the first term that comes to mind. And, it doesn't mean you set something in stone at once and you're done. But I'll go back to the position I was taking earlier about secure reference architecture, the fundamentals. Just to defend myself a little bit, I don't want to be the guy riding the horse that says I'm never going to drive a car. I think having a mature program, a mature focus meaning we've identified and prioritized the top elements of risk, the most impactful elements of risk. We've done a good enough job at managing that risk, putting controls and procedures in place. And then governance is absolutely key. I mean, it's like any audit, like financial audit, right? We say we do this and we can prove it with data.
Yeah.
I know I'm chronically oversimplifying that, but in a lot of ways, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to that rigor and thoughtfulness of putting a program together, a governance model, actually mapping that back to something that matters to the business, to customers, to society, and being able to prove that you're doing it.
Yeah, ISA 62443, it's often confused as just giving you a risk assessment, but it is actually a roadmap for a program, right?
Yep.
And so if there are frameworks like that exist that could teach organizations or give them the way to implement a systematic way to address risk over and over and over again until it's something that's just part of the way everybody does business. And I think if decisions are made along those lines, in terms of like the process of making decisions, so that, AI is kind of being implemented in a piecemeal way. I feel like if this continues and there's no security program around it, we will end up 5 years from now going, wow, we shouldn't have done it that way, right? Just like we do now when we talk about things we did 5 years ago. And so organizations have a real opportunity to take a programmatic approach to these issues, doing something like implementing a program along a framework that allows them to address every issue as it comes up systematically.
Yeah, that really flows right well into the technology plays a role, which is what I'm supposed to be looking at. And to your point, one school of thought is to buy the best in breed technology and have bunches of little things that you Frankenstein together, and they never really work completely, and you never get to take advantage of all of the benefits of a single platform. So, in my opinion, it's always better to kind of get the capabilities all integrated seamlessly, right? Sometimes less is more. Take a consolidated platform approach, and when you're trying to implement some sort of disparate tool set, you never get to take advantage of all of its features. So when you consider technology, always be thinking of what you're going to want to do with that technology and what you're going to interact with, and that you're looking at next year or 5 years down the road, not just the big, bright, shiny object in front of you today.
I like what Victor was referencing there with IEC. That triggered some other thinking, and their maturity levels, right? You're not going for the big, perfect security program out the gate. You can't afford it, number one. Probably haven't thought through it well enough, number two. And, start somewhere. Get some basics in place. Oh, God, here I am back to the basics.
No, that's
iterate on it. And that's why that model speaks to these different maturity levels. And you may not need to go to the ultimate level. That gets into the whole appetite for risk.
I think if we get anything out of this is that AI is a tool. It's a supplement to
There you go.
basic hygiene. I hate that word, but if you don't have the basics in place, AI is not going to help you. If you don't have your systems patched, if you don't have your systems hardened, AI is just going to collect a whole lot of data that you're not really able to take advantage of. So I agree with you totally.
Well, after this call, I'm going to go on Copilot and ask it, what 62443 maturity level I should aspire to, and see what I get.
1.5.
Yeah.
You guys have anything you want to add as we close? How we can leverage AI, maybe protect industrial controls, or what you might see as the future of AI in manufacturing?
I liked your summary, Larry. Really positioning it and thinking through what is its usefulness, what is its purpose, where does it fit in, as opposed to, because you were heading in the other direction, shiny object syndrome. We know where that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said it well.
Am I back now? Did you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah,
now.
we got you back, Richard.
Okay, my avatar alerted me that it fell on its face, so it's the real me now. But I certainly appreciate you guys carrying on without me and the conversation. We just got a couple minutes left here. Maybe what I'd like to do is just kind of wrap this up. I mean, we have covered so much ground. I've been very educational from my standpoint. We've answered a couple questions in the Q&A, but if we can just leave the audience with kind of maybe just one tip or trick as we wrap up the session. Victor, I'll go to you, then Larry, then Rob. So Victor, what do you have for a takeaway?
Well, I'm going to take two, and I'm going to say one is prioritization. We hit on it earlier. Not all your critical processes are equally relevant to the overall, sustainability and viability of your business. So prioritize what you think matters the most in terms of your control processes, and really focus on that from a cyber perspective. And then I would say also, this is all a team sport. You've got to integrate your IT, OT, executives, security, engineers. Everybody's got to be part of these discussions because it's really the fate of your business is at stake if the gaps are too big between those organizations, and those gaps are the things that our adversaries are actually taking advantage of. So.
Okay, great. Larry, 60 seconds to you, and then Rob will wrap us up.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I think it's important that you understand that AI is just another tool, and we still need people on staff to, rein it in when it needs to be and take advantage of it when it's working well.
Good. Well, I'll keep it really positive. The tools coming out of data science, let's keep it kind of general like that, are compelling. I think they have the ability and opportunity to create efficiencies and insights that are desirable. But in a lot of ways, the market, the landscape, the verticals aren't there yet. And so looking to something like that, while skipping this other rigor that you need to go through, identifying risk, understanding the impact of that risk to your environment and prioritizing it, is huge. I love that conversation with customers. I learned so much about their business and how they think about their business. And that's, really the core of it. So stepping back, being thoughtful, understanding your order of solve, finding a framework, and then you can look to these other tools. How do I solve that problem with this tool? And so that would be my piece. Very exciting, has wonderful potential, but it's not the quick fix. It's not the silver bullet.
Yeah. All right. Well, Victor, Larry, and Rob, thank you so much. Great insight as we enter this brave new world, literally. And then our audience as well, the participation, and then I want to thank IIoT world as well for hosting us. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it, and look forward to the next conversation.